Imagine a man who stole more than 400 ships in just 3 years. A man so feared that entire navies trembled at the sight of his black flag. And yet, this man never wanted to be a pirate. This is the story of Bartholomew Roberts, better known as Black Bart, the king of pirates, whose rise was so fast and so ruthless that even Blackbeard would look small in comparison. Early life, an unlikely beginning. Bartholomew Roberts was born in 1682 in Wales, in a small village called Casnewyddbach. Unlike many of his infamous pirate peers, Roberts was not a product of poverty, abuse, or desperation. In fact, very little is known of his childhood, but what we do know paints a picture of a man destined for the sea, not piracy. By his 20s, Roberts had joined the merchant navy and worked his way up to becoming a skilled navigator. He was known for his intelligence, his sharp dress sense, and a quiet but commanding personality. Yet, unlike the flamboyant pirates of the Caribbean, Roberts wasn't reckless. He wasn't violent. He wasn't even particularly rebellious. And that's what makes his transformation into the most successful pirate of all time so shocking. Fate at sea. In 1719, Roberts was serving as the third mate on a British slave ship called the Princess. The vessel was bound for Africa to collect enslaved people for transport across the Atlantic, a grim but common trait of the era. While off the coast of Ghana, Roberts's ship was captured by a pirate crew led by Howell Davis, a daring Welsh pirate. Most captured sailors were given a choice: join us or die. For many, piracy was a last resort. Roberts, however, hesitated. He was not thrilled by the idea of becoming an outlaw. But fate, and a pistol at his back, forced his hand. Reluctantly, he agreed to join Davis's crew. It was a decision that would change the course of history. The making of a pirate. At first, Roberts kept a low profile aboard Davis's ship. He wasn't one for drunken brawls or flashy plundering. But the pirates quickly noticed something: Roberts had a rare gift for navigation. He could chart courses with uncanny precision, avoid naval patrols, and find rich merchant routes others didn't even know existed. Howell Davis saw this talent and made Roberts his navigator. For the next several weeks, Roberts learned the pirates' trade, boarding ships, dividing plunder, and navigating through storms and hostile waters. But Roberts was still not entirely one of them. That is, until a fateful event forced him to embrace piracy completely. Blood and betrayal. In July 1719, Davis attempted to trick the governor of Principe Island, off the coast of modern-day Guinea, into inviting him ashore. Davis planned to kidnap the governor and ransom him for treasure. But the scheme failed. Ambushed by soldiers, Davis was shot dead on the spot. The crew was stunned. Their leader was gone. And in the chaos, the pirates turned to Roberts. Why him? Because he was clever, calm, and, most importantly, he had the skill to lead them out of danger. At first, Roberts protested. He wasn't cut from the same cloth as Davis. He wasn't a natural pirate. But the crew insisted. They elected Roberts as their new captain. And in that moment, Bartholomew Roberts, once a reluctant sailor, was reborn as the most dangerous pirate the world would ever see. A captain transformed. Roberts surprised everyone. Within days of becoming captain, he launched a daring raid on Principe Island to avenge Davis's death. He led his men ashore, burned the settlement, and struck fear into the hearts of the Portuguese colonists. The message was clear: Roberts was no reluctant pirate anymore. He was a man on a mission. Unlike other pirate leaders, Roberts imposed discipline on his crew. He dressed in fine silks, carried himself like a nobleman, and banned drunkenness during raids. He even created his own pirate code, demanding order, loyalty, and fairness in dividing loot. He was not just a pirate, he was a commander, a strategist, and, soon, a king. Roberts's ambition. Most pirates operated near the Caribbean, raiding small merchant vessels and occasionally clashing with the Spanish. But Roberts thought bigger. Much bigger. He turned his gaze to the entire Atlantic. He would raid not only in the Caribbean, but also along the coasts of Africa and South America. Merchant fleets, slave ships, even naval escorts, all were fair game. Roberts didn't just want treasure. He wanted dominance. The rise of the Black Bart legend. By late 1719, Roberts's reputation was already spreading. His black flag, adorned with a skeleton holding an hourglass, became a symbol of terror. Ships surrendered at the mere sight of it. Captains whispered his name with dread. And the most astonishing part? Roberts achieved in months what had taken other pirates years. He wasn't just a successful raider, he was reshaping piracy itself. As one sailor wrote at the time, "Roberts is the greatest man the pirates ever knew. He outdoes them all." A new kind of pirate. By 1720, Bartholomew Roberts had been a pirate captain for less than a year, yet he had already shocked the world. Unlike most pirates who lurked near the Caribbean, Roberts thought globally. He saw the Atlantic Ocean as his playground, and every ship upon it as his prize. Where Blackbeard relied on fear and intimidation, Roberts relied on discipline and strategy. He dressed in a crimson waistcoat and an extravagant feathered hat, more like a nobleman than a rogue. His crew adored him because he wasn't reckless with their lives. He chose his battles carefully, often seizing ships without firing a single shot. Roberts was no common criminal. He was building an empire. The Code of Black Bart. One of Roberts's greatest strengths was his sense of order. Pirates were notorious for chaos, drinking, fighting, mutiny, but Roberts refused to tolerate it. He enforced a strict pirate code, which included the equal division of plunder, so every man had a share. No gambling aboard ship. Lights out by 8 p.m., silence and rest were essential. Musicians must be ready to play when ordered. No women aboard under any circumstances. If any man broke these rules, Roberts's punishments were harsh but fair. This discipline made his crews unusually loyal. They respected him not only as a leader but as a man who brought order to lawlessness. In many ways, Roberts's ships were more democratic and organized than the governments he fought against. The conquests begin. Roberts's first major triumph as captain came in late 1719. Off the coast of Brazil, he captured a Portuguese treasure fleet of 42 ships. By isolating and storming just one vessel, he secured a haul worth millions in today's currency. It was the kind of prize pirates dreamed of, and it announced Roberts as a player on the world stage. But this was only the beginning. Roberts swept across the Atlantic like a storm. In the Caribbean, he plundered Barbados and Martinique, capturing ship after ship. His reputation spread so far that colonial governors offered bounties for his head. But still, his legend grew. The pirate king of the Atlantic. Roberts didn't merely raid ships. He humiliated nations. When the governor of Barbados sent a ship to hunt him, Roberts retaliated by attacking the island itself, firing cannons into its harbor as a warning. In Martinique, he did the same. Soon, his flags bore symbols mocking both colonies, a skull with the initials ABH, a Barbadian's head, and AMH, a Martinican's head. For merchants and colonists, Roberts was more than a pirate, he was a phantom of vengeance. Between 1719 and 1722, Roberts is believed to have captured over 400 ships. No pirate before or since matched this record. He had become, quite literally, the king of pirates. The floating empire. Roberts commanded multiple ships at once, turning his fleet into a mobile empire. His flagship, the Royal Fortune, was a fearsome sight, bristling with cannons, sails blackened with tar, and the dreaded Jolly Roger flying high. His empire wasn't only built on plunder. Roberts maintained alliances with other pirate crews, supplied ports with stolen goods, and even controlled stretches of the African coast. In some places, he operated like a ruler, dictating trade and punishing those who resisted. The Atlantic had never seen anything like him. Roberts the strategist. What set Roberts apart wasn't just his ambition, it was his brilliance as a strategist. He studied the routes of merchant fleets, predicted their movements, and struck at the weakest points. He mastered deception. Sometimes he sailed under false flags to lure ships closer. Other times, he used speed and precision to overwhelm enemies before they could react. And he understood the power of fear. Many ships surrendered instantly at the sight of his flag. Why fight when you knew the king of pirates was bearing down on you? Notorious raids. Some of Roberts's most infamous raids included the capture of the Onslow, 1721, a massive British warship seized near West Africa, later refitted as Roberts's new Royal Fortune. The West African raids, Roberts terrorized the Gold Coast, capturing dozens of slave ships and merchant vessels, crippling trade routes. The raid on Newfoundland, he plundered fishing fleets and burned ships in the harbors, sending shockwaves across the North Atlantic. Each success added to his legend. Fear and admiration. Roberts was both feared and admired, even by his enemies. Merchants cursed his name, but sailors often spoke of him with grudging respect. Unlike some pirates, Roberts rarely killed unnecessarily. He preferred efficiency over cruelty. Yet, he could be ruthless when provoked. Captains who resisted too strongly sometimes found themselves hanged or marooned. And his vengeance against Barbados and Martinique showed he was not a man to forgive insults. To his crew, however, Roberts was almost regal. He wore diamonds, drank fine wine, and carried himself as if he were born to rule. And in truth, on the high seas, he was a king. The growing threat. But Roberts's fame came at a price. The more powerful he became, the more desperate governments grew to end his reign. The Royal Navy, pressured by colonial merchants, began deploying warships specifically to hunt him. Still, Roberts seemed unstoppable. For 3 years, he evaded capture, humiliated his enemies, and grew his empire. He was the closest thing the world had ever seen to a pirate emperor. But empires rarely last forever. The beginning of the end. By 1722, Bartholomew Roberts had spent nearly 3 years as the undisputed ruler of the seas. His record was staggering: more than 400 ships captured, governors humiliated, and entire colonies shaken. He was, without question, the most successful pirate in history. But the British Empire had had enough. Merchants in London were furious. The transatlantic trade, the lifeblood of Britain's economy, was bleeding under Roberts's relentless raids. Governors demanded protection. Shipowners demanded justice. And the Royal Navy finally took serious action. Their answer came in the form of one warship, HMS Swallow, commanded by Captain Chaloner Ogle. The hunt begins. The Swallow was a 50-gun warship, heavily armed and manned by seasoned sailors. Ogle was given orders to hunt down Roberts and destroy him, no matter the cost. The mission would not be easy. Roberts was a master navigator who knew the Atlantic better than most naval officers. He was also backed by a fleet of loyal pirates who would fight fiercely to protect their king. Still, Ogle was patient. He tracked Roberts across the West African coast, gathering intelligence from terrified merchants and captured sailors. Slowly but surely, the noose began to tighten. Roberts's last stronghold. By early 1722, Roberts had anchored his fleet at Cape Lopez, modern-day Gabon. It was a familiar haunt for him, a place where he could refit his ships and plan his next strikes on the lucrative slave trade routes. But what Roberts didn't know was that Ogle and the Swallow were closing in. The fatal encounter. On February 5, 1722, Roberts spotted what he believed was an unarmed merchant ship approaching Cape Lopez. Hungry for plunder, he dispatched one of his vessels to intercept it. But it was a trap. The merchant ship was actually Ogle's Swallow, sailing under disguise. When the pirates drew near, Ogle unleashed a devastating broadside, tearing the vessel apart and sending survivors scrambling. The element of surprise was gone. Roberts now knew the Swallow was hunting him. Still, the pirate king refused to run. The last stand. The next morning, Roberts prepared for battle. His flagship, the Royal Fortune, was armed with 40 cannons and manned by nearly 200 pirates. Roberts dressed in his finest attire, crimson coat, feathered hat, and a gold cross around his neck. If he was to die, he would do so like a king. As the Swallow bore down on them, Roberts gave the order to fight. Cannons roared, muskets cracked, and smoke filled the air. For a time, the pirates held their own. Roberts maneuvered with skill, striking back with volleys of fire. But the Swallow had the advantage. Its heavier guns pummeled the Royal Fortune, splintering its hull and shredding its sails. Then, in the chaos of battle, tragedy struck. The death of a king. Bartholomew Roberts was standing on deck, surveying the fight, when a cannon shot tore through the air. A chain of grapeshot ripped across the deck, striking Roberts in the throat. He died instantly. There was no time for mourning. The pirates, knowing their leader was gone, faced capture. But Roberts had prepared for this moment. His crew remembered his order: "If I fall, throw me overboard. Let no man take me." True to his wishes, they wrapped his body in sailcloth, weighted it with chains, and cast him into the sea. The king of pirates would never be paraded in chains through London. He would rest forever in the waters he once ruled. The collapse of the empire. With Roberts dead, the fight crumbled. The Swallow overwhelmed the Royal Fortune, capturing 272 pirates. Of these, more than 50 were executed, while others were sentenced to prison or slavery. It was one of the largest pirate trials in history, and it marked the symbolic end of the golden age of piracy. Roberts's empire, built in just 3 short years, was gone. The legend lives on. But even in death, Roberts became a legend. Sailors spoke of his brilliance, his daring, and his unmatched record of conquests. Unlike Blackbeard, who relied on theatrics, Roberts commanded respect through discipline and strategy. Unlike Captain Kidd, who was betrayed by politics, Roberts carved his own fate. To many, he wasn't just a pirate, he was a king who ruled the seas and defied empires. The Pirate King's legacy. Historians often call Roberts the most successful pirate of all time. His capture of more than 400 ships remains unmatched. His pirate code influenced maritime law. And his death marked the beginning of the end for the golden age of piracy. Even the British admitted his power. Captain Ogle, who defeated him, was knighted for his victory, the only naval officer ever honored for defeating a pirate. But Roberts's story remains unique. He was not born to be a pirate, and he never sought the life. Yet, in just 3 years, he reshaped history, becoming the last, and perhaps greatest, pirate king. The end of the Golden Age. When Bartholomew Roberts fell at Cape Lopez in 1722, it was more than just the death of a man, it was the death knell of the golden age of piracy. For decades, pirates had terrorized the Atlantic, striking fear into merchants and empires alike. But Roberts's death proved that even the greatest pirate could be brought down. Within a few short years, piracy as the world had known it was largely extinguished. Yet Roberts's story did not sink with his body. It lived on, in courts, in books, in taverns, and eventually in legend. The trial of his men. The aftermath of Roberts's death was a spectacle. The captured pirates from the Royal Fortune were brought to trial at Cape Coast Castle in West Africa. It was one of the largest pirate trials in history. Of the 272 men captured, 52 were executed by hanging. Dozens more were sentenced to hard labor or slavery. Only a handful escaped with light punishment. These trials shocked the public but also fascinated them. Newspapers across Europe reported every detail, spreading Roberts's name even further. Ironically, his death gave him the fame in Europe he had never sought in life. The pirate code lives on. One of Roberts's most enduring contributions was his pirate code. While many pirate crews had their own rules, Roberts's version was one of the most detailed and disciplined. It emphasized fairness, loyalty, and discipline aboard ship. Loot was shared equally. Mutiny was punished. Gambling was banned. Even musicians were regulated. This code has fascinated historians because it showed that pirates were not simply lawless criminals, they were men who built their own societies, often more democratic and fair than the monarchies they fought against. Roberts's code would later inspire novels, films, and even modern pirate reenactments. The legend in print. Just 2 years after his death, Roberts's story was immortalized in one of the most influential books of the 18th century, A General History of the Pirates, 1724, compiled by Captain Charles Johnson, a pseudonym, possibly for Daniel Defoe. This book described Roberts as the most gallant and greatest pirate of them all. It painted him not as a mere criminal, but as a man of honor, discipline, and charisma, a king among outlaws. The General History became a bestseller, fueling the world's fascination with pirates. Much of what we think of as pirate culture, the Jolly Roger flag, the pirate code, even the romantic idea of pirate kings, comes directly from this book. And at its center stood Bartholomew Roberts. The romantic pirate myth. Over time, Roberts's story was polished into legend. Writers portrayed him as a reluctant hero, forced into piracy, but excelling at it like no one else. He was remembered not for cruelty, but for brilliance. Not for savagery, but for strategy. He became the model of the gentleman pirate, a figure both feared and admired. This romanticized image spread across Europe and, centuries later, into novels, plays, and films. Characters inspired by Roberts can be found in adventure stories of the 18th and 19th centuries, and echoes of his legend appear even in modern pirate movies like Pirates of the Caribbean. The historical legacy. Historians today consider Roberts the most successful pirate in history. His capture of more than 400 ships dwarfs the records of Blackbeard, Calico Jack, and Bonny combined. Yet, Roberts remains unique. Unlike most pirates, he did not seek out a life of crime. He was forced into piracy, and for 3 short years, he ruled the seas with a discipline and vision unmatched in the age of sail. His death marked the transition from the chaotic golden age of piracy to a world where empires tightened their grip on the seas. The king who stole an empire. In many ways, Roberts truly did steal an empire. Not through crowns and castles, but through ships and oceans. For 3 years, he bent the Atlantic to his will, raiding colonies, crippling trade, and shaking governments. He was a pirate, yes, but he was also a strategist, a commander, and a king in all but name. And though he died at sea, his story continues to echo across the centuries. The Pirate King's immortality. Bartholomew Roberts's true legacy lies not in the treasure he stole, but in the legend he left behind. His story helped shape the world's enduring fascination with pirates, not as common thieves, but as rebels, adventurers, and rulers of the sea. Even today, when we picture a pirate captain in a crimson coat, standing proud on the deck of a black-sailed ship, we are seeing the shadow of Bartholomew Roberts. The King of Pirates. The man who stole an empire.